Good evening, wanderer of stories. Tonight, we slip past heavy oaken doors and candlelit corridors into spaces where whispered breath blends with the creak of aged floorboards and the faint tang of hops from a long-forgotten tankard lingers in the air. Here, behind tapestries and bolted shutters, lives unfurl in shadowed intimacy, and you're about to witness the stark divide between peasant hovels and gilded chambers along the medieval spectrum. Find a comfortable spot, allow your shoulders to soften, and let the steady rhythm of your breath guide you towards stillness. While you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my work. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what hour glows on your clock. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the crowded tenements of a medieval village, privacy was a luxury as rare as silk stockings. Most common folk shared single-room dwellings lit by narrow windows and flickering rushlights, their beds doubling as dining tables by day. The scent of last night's porridge mingled with damp straw, and the faint whiff of livestock pressed in through cracks in the wooden walls. By contrast, a noble's chamber boasted thick draperies designed to ward off cold draughts and curious glances, though the promise of secluded passion often dissolved under the weight of expensive tapestries clinging damply to stone. Within these modest peasant homes, communal sleeping was the rule rather than the exception. Entire families huddled beneath coarse wool blankets. It was common to feel a sibling's elbow nudge against your ribs in the midnight dark, or to awaken to the warmth of a parent's arm curled around you in protective slumber. Personal space existed only in stolen moments behind a grinding millstone, or as one slipped outside to the privy hut. A mainstream fact, most medieval homes consisted of a single multi-purpose room where daily life and nightly rest were indistinguishable. Yet even within cramped quarters, medieval couples found opportunities for intimacy. A quirky fringe tidbit: some late-period knights employed animal bladders soaked in oil as rudimentary condoms, an innovation that historians still debate regarding its actual effectiveness. The thought of a damp, oiled bladder sliding into place might unsettle the modern mind, but for those daring enough to try, it represented a sliver of control over conception and disease in an age before germ theory. Up in the manor house, oak beams groaned under tapestries depicting saintly martyrdom and mythical beasts. Velvet cushions, softened marble benches, and a warming brazier sent golden embers floating into the dusky air. Here, aristocratic lovers reclined on plump mattresses stacked between silk sheets, not because they lacked modern comforts, but because they delighted in conspicuous consumption. A scandalously unromantic truth. Even the highest born sometimes snored louder than the average peasant, shattering any illusion of poetic repose. Historians still argue whether noble couples enjoyed significantly more privacy than their rural counterparts, since servants and wardens often trailed closely behind to address any emergent need, or, more frequently, to ensure nothing scandalous occurred. Despite the grandeur, noble chambers weren't immune to the sensory tapestry of the era. The smell of lavender oil, intended to mask odors and soothe the mind, blended with the sulphurous scent of flaring torches. Velvet curtains absorbed sound, but every sigh and shuffle still echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Silk sheets could be as scratchy as they were sumptuous, and bedposts carved with grotesque gargoyles watched over lovers with silent amusement. In the lowliest hut next door, the soundscape was different, yet equally intimate. Chickens clucked in the yard, and the distant bleating of sheep wove through the din of coughing and whispered prayers. When a couple sought closeness, they had few pretenses. The soft hiss of sliding straw, the creak of a rickety bed frame, even the occasional squeal from a startled mouse, were all part of the nocturnal score. Here, the line between necessity and desire blurred. Children might lie underfoot, tulips of oil lanterns cast dancing shadows, and every movement risked waking the neighbours. Sometimes, a travelling minstrel's bawdy tune wafted through the open door, granting a momentary soundtrack to clandestine pleasure. Other times, the sharp bark of a serf's mule reminded all present that this world was rooted in toil. Within such simplicity, Couples adapted elaborate rituals, a stolen knot in a curtain as a signal, a coded knock on the rickety door, or even a common breadcrumb tucked into a hair braid to communicate readiness. These small acts of ingenuity served as erotic punctuation in a world starved for secrecy. Yet, even behind bolted shutters and grand canopies, the risk of discovery was real. A sudden cough from a passing guard, or the creak of a floorboard under an overzealous footman, could send hearts racing. The penalty for perceived scandal, especially among nobility, could entail public penance or a forced separation. In villages, gossip wielded power sharper than any blade, ensuring that most lovers preferred the dim recesses of barns or fields under the moon rather than the ever-watching eyes indoors. Throughout these settings, one constant emerges: human desire finds a way. Whether pressed between straw-stuffed mattresses in a muddy cottage, or luxuriating on featherbeds in a stone keep, intimacy thrived under both the humblest and grandest roofs. Historians still argue whether the thrill lay more in forbidden secrecy or in the simple act of connection itself. But what's undeniable is that medieval men and women, regardless of station, navigated love and lust with the same creativity and occasional awkwardness that we would recognize today. In the courts of Aquitaine and Champagne, troubadour songs floated like delicate petals on the breeze, painting courtly love as an art form more refined than a peacock's plume. Noble women sat upon carved wooden chairs, upholstered in rich brocade, attendants fluttering at their sides like dutiful sparrows. Verses spoke of eyes that shone brighter than polished gold, of vows sworn beneath moonlight sweeter than the finest mead. These lyrical serenades set the stage for an ideal where love was endured in silence, worshipped from afar, and expressed through coded glances and silk-wrapped tokens. The mainstream truth is that courtly love emerged in the late 11th century at Eleanor of Aquitaine's court, where nobles raised romantic devotion to a near-religious devotion. Gentlemen composed poetry in Occitan, crafting sonnets that equated a lady's favour with knightly honour. A nobleman might dedicate weeks, sometimes years, to winning a single glance, offering finely embroidered purses or hand-carved bone combs as proofs of devotion. In theory, passion was ennobling, even if it languished beneath layers of etiquette. Yet, beyond the polished veneer lay a more corporeal reality. While troubadour lyrics exalted chaste longing, many aristocrats indulged in affairs just as earthy as any peasants. A quirky tidbit whispers that some knights used the cover of mock jousts to smuggle lovers into secluded tents, disguised as competing champions. Imagine the clatter of lances and the cheers of courtiers, masking furtive footsteps toward a canvas-draped pavilion where oath-bound vows dissolved into breathless rendezvous. Historians still argue whether these staged tournaments were orchestrated purely for sport or served as elaborate pretexts for secret assignations. Indeed, the coded language of love songs could hide racy requests beneath florid praise. References to lilies and roses doubled as discreet euphemisms for parts of the body too intimate for open mention. A poet's metaphor about petals trembling in dawn's first light might translate into an explicit plea for reunion at the break of day. Noble women, trained in the art of subtlety, would send back messages through intricate embroidery patterns or the placement of a glove upon a tapestry, signals that courtiers learned to read as readily as any map. Despite this sophistication, the social cost of scandal remained immense. A mainstream fact: adultery among the aristocracy could result in fines, forced marriages, or public shaming rituals, depending on local custom. A count caught with a married lady risked stripped titles, while a prominent countess might endure ritual pestrinal penance in the cathedral square. Yet, enforcement was uneven, influenced by alliances, wealth, and the sheer spectacle of judicial proceedings. Rumour and reputation wielded more power than any codified law. At the heart of the debate is the question of sincerity. Were troubadours truth-tellers or entertainers weaving pleasing illusions? Some scholars argue that courtly love was largely symbolic, a performance art masking the transactional nature of medieval marriages, which bound families rather than hearts. Others suggest that within the strictures of feudal society, this romantic code offered genuine emotional refuge, a sanctioned outlet for desire under watchful eyes. Meanwhile, fringe stories bloom on the margins of recorded history. One tale claims that a certain lady of a Burgundian court trained a falcon to deliver love letters, its beak clipped to prevent escape. When the bird returned empty, she assumed rejection, but when it came back with a rose tied to its leg, she knew her knight had succeeded. Such anecdotes, though unverified, hint at the lengths to which lovers would go to maintain discretion and drama. The sensory landscape of these courtly encounters could be intoxicating. Imagine plush rugs, muffling footsteps on stone floors, incense burning low in braided censers, and the muted sparkle of candlelight reflecting off silk hems. Gentle lute chords mingled with the rustle of velvet, while distant laughter and soft applause echoed through arched hallways. Contrast this with the crusted dirt and straw of a peasant barn, and the gulf between illusion and reality yawns wide. Unsurprisingly, real-life affairs often ended far differently than poetic renderings. A mainstream truth. The Marquis Ulrich of Flanders once imprisoned his lady-love in a tower when her flirtations threatened his political standing. Her pleas carried on the wind like plaintive verses, but no troubadour rallied to her rescue. Such incidents remind us that beneath the romantic facade lurked the stern power dynamics of feudal rule. Even when love triumphed, its outcomes were bittersweet. Marriages arranged for political alliance sometimes blossomed into genuine affection, but love unrecognized by church or crown could leave participants vulnerable to blackmail or violence. Allegations of impropriety might be leveraged to coerce payments or gains. Historians still argue whether these manipulations undermined the very ideals troubadours celebrated or simply affirmed that romance, medieval or modern, has always danced on a knife's edge. By contrast, some lovers found solace in the boundaries of platonic devotion. The famous case of Abelard and Heloise, scholars turned secret spouses, reveals a more intellectual pursuit of intimacy. Mind meeting mind in the cloister's hush, their love letters blending theology with raw emotion. While their story unfolded in the 12th century, their correspondence echoes through time, reminding us that medieval passion, whether carnal or cerebral, defied easy classification. Ultimately, the illusions of courtly love served both as a mirror and a mask. They reflected genuine yearnings for beauty and connection, even as they concealed the messier truths of human desire. In the grand halls of Europe's nobility, silk and song offered a stage where love could be both performance and escape. Historians still debate whether this theatrical display enriched medieval society or merely distracted from its harsher realities. Yet whatever the verdict, those lavish verses continue to captivate modern readers, tempting us to believe that somewhere beneath those ornate rhymes lies a heart beating as recklessly as our own. The cathedral bells toll at dawn and dusk, marking the rhythm of parish life. Yet within their echo lies a more solemn undercurrent, the Church's firm hand guiding bodies as well as souls. Across Christendom, ecclesiastical authorities codified intimate conduct with surprising thoroughness. Canon law prescribed that all sexual acts must serve the dual purposes of procreation and marital unity, casting any deviation into moral limbo. The mainstream fact is that the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 formally banned any unnatural unions, reinforcing earlier edicts that condemned contraception and non-procreative sex as grave sins. Clerics argued that pleasure divorced from purpose disrupted divine order, consigning offenders to the risk of eternal perdition. In village pulpits, sermons painted carnal desire as a festering weed sprouting from original sin, a thorny temptation to be pruned through confession and penance. Parishioners confessed in whispered tones behind screen-painted cubicles, revealing clandestine liaisons and hidden yearnings. A fringe tidbit recalls that some priests once kept rudimentary sin lists on parchment scrolls, tallying infractions from inordinate kissing to unsanctioned embraces, though scholars still debate the existence of such records and whether they were more rumour than reality. Whether or not these lists survived, the threat of public shame loomed large. When a layperson admitted to sin, the penance could range from simple prayers to elaborate public rites. A devout wife, caught conceiving outside marriage, might be sentenced to a sackcloth shirt and weeks of barefoot processions around the church plaza. chanting psalms as curious onlookers murmured judgments. A noble caught in adultery risked a more discreet, but no less humiliating, penance. Private seclusion in a monastery guest cell, deprived of company, until a cloistered brother declared the soul sufficiently purged. Historians still argue whether clerical courts wielded more power over lay marriages than secular lords, since both jurisdictions often overlapped and sometimes clashed. Monastic manuals detailed penances with painstaking specificity. For a single act of premarital intercourse, a penitent might perform 40 days of fasting on bread and water, retreating at dawn to chant penitential psalms. The rigorous routines tested both endurance and humility, channeling bodily discipline into spiritual cleansing. Yet enforcement varied by region and community wealth. In some parishes, the poor endured harsh penances with no mercy, while affluent offenders could bribe clerics or negotiate reduced sentences through strategic almsgiving. Church doctrine extended beyond sin to prescribe daily moral behavior. Texts like the Summa Theologica debated whether marital sex required strict scheduling to avoid unseemly delight. Couples were advised to limit intimacy to nights following the full moon, since that phase supposedly aligned with fertility cycles. A curious blend of religious command and proto-scientific observation. Historians still debate whether these lunar guidelines stemmed from clerical attempts at population control or were simply echoes of earlier folk traditions co-opted by the Church. The theological reasoning behind such rules carried a distinct sensory drama. Confessionals reeked of damp wood and beeswax candles, their dim light casting penitents' faces in harsh relief. The priest's voice, muffled through a screen, offered absolution only after contrition proved genuine. As coarse cloth scratched skin during imposed sackcloth penances, the faint tang of incense wafted through the church, reminding suffering souls of sacred forgiveness. In the silence that followed absolution, the penitent often felt both relief and lingering shame, carrying spiritual scars as deeply as any physical ones. Not all clerics preached with equal fervor. Some friars embraced a more lenient approach, arguing that compassion outweighed rigid doctrine. The Franciscan emphasis on mercy sometimes led to reduced penance requirements, prioritizing the sinner's return to the fold over strict punishment. A quirky anecdote claims that Saint Pont, Francis himself, once intervened in a peasant's penance, advising the priest to replace 40 days of fasting with 40 good deeds performed in charity. While the veracity of this tale remains contested, it illustrates the tension between punitive and pastoral models within the medieval church. Beyond individual confessions, the church held public rituals aimed at reinforcing communal morality. The rough music ceremony, common in some northern regions, involved parading a convicted adulterer through the streets while drummers beat kettles and townsfolk jeered. Such spectacles blurred the line between civic justice and religious sanction, embedding sexual shame in collective memory. Scholars still argue whether these events were primarily ecclesiastical in origin or driven by grassroots social control. Even within marriage, the church maintained strict oversight. Couples were required to obtain a banns announcement. 3 consecutive Sundays during which the intended marriage was proclaimed publicly, to ensure no impediments like consanguinity or pre-existing. Vows. Breaking this process risked annulment and public disgrace. Yet loopholes abounded. Some couples bribed church officials or sought dispensations from sympathetic bishops, turning ecclesiastical bureaucracy into yet another arena for negotiation and deception. Ultimately, medieval churchly morality operated as both guide and jailer. It provided a framework for sexual behavior, promising spiritual harmony while wielding shame as a tool of compliance. The blend of dogma, ritual, and community enforcement created a pervasive atmosphere where desire was constantly measured against divine law. Historians still debate whether this moral machinery suppressed genuine intimacy or simply redirected it into more acceptable channels. What remains clear is that in the medieval mind, the body was never purely private. The soul's welfare depended on the whispered verdicts of priests and the watchful eyes of neighbours. Hidden behind crooked alleyways and tucked beneath the overhang of timbered buildings, medieval brothels thrived in a shadow economy that catered to every tier of desire. In many towns, These establishments, often called stews, occupied converted bathhouses or repurposed courtyards, their damp walls still rich with the scent of lye and warming stones. Patrons stepped over mossy threshold stones slick with runoff from communal tubs, expecting privacy and discretion in exchange for coin. The mainstream fact is that from the 12th century onward, municipal authorities in cities like London and Paris officially licensed brothels, regulating them through periodic inspections and taxation to control disease and public order. Within these walls, rooms lined with rush mats and bare boards hosted a variety of services. Gentle lamp light flickered against plastered walls, revealing curtained stalls where clients and sex workers negotiated price, position, and privacy. A fringe tidbit holds that some adventurers brought dice to settle wagers over the number of larks a worker could perform in an hour, a practice historians still debate given its dubious documentation. Whether or not these gaming practices flourished, they speak to a culture that celebrated carnality with a playful irreverence unusual in more public settings. Brothel madams wielded surprising influence. Often widows or divorced women who faced limited economic options, they ran houses with strict codes: no violence, no theft, and mandatory health checks. Periodic physician visits examined workers for signs of venereal disease, though the effectiveness of such inspections varied widely. Municipal decrees sometimes required women to bathe before each client, using concoctions of vinegar and rosewater to combat odours, a practice some viewed as hygiene, others as mere theatre. Historians still argue whether these inspections genuinely curbed illness or simply projected an illusion of sanitary control. Outside the regulated quarters lay an even darker marketplace. Unlicensed sex workers plied their trade in taverns and along market streets, vulnerable to arrest, exploitation, or violence. Local watchmen patrolled these areas, their lanterns revealing huddled figures slipping coin beneath burlap cloaks. Arrests peaked at festival times, when demand surged and officials cracked down to assert moral authority. Yet clandestine rings often bribed guards, ensuring a steady stream of clandestine commerce under the radar. In some villages, travelling fairs served as temporary hubs of underground pleasures. Merchants from across Europe converged, bringing with them entertainers, merchants, and, inevitably, sex workers. Makeshift tents offered intimacy amid the swirl of pipers and pole dancers. The sensory collage, boots splashing in muddy fields, the sharp bite of fried meats, and the murmur of haggling became the backdrop to countless secret trysts. A modern parallel emerges in how festival-goers today slip away from crowds seeking unscripted connections, suggesting that commerce of desire transcends centuries. Beyond urban centres, castles discreetly hosted courtesans during hunts or tournaments. A curious anecdote recounts that the Margrave of Brandenburg stationed a troupe of entertainers who doubled as companions, instructed to dress in the colours of his household banner for both identification and discretion. Scholars still debate whether such arrangements blurred lines between courtly decorum and outright licentiousness, but they underscore how noble needs shaped underground services. Despite the veneer of consent, power dynamics often lurked beneath. Many workers were young women sold into service by impoverished families, their autonomy constrained by contracts and debt. Legal documents sometimes bound them to madams until they repaid advances for clothing, lodging, and learning the trade. While some women managed to save enough for freedom, others remained trapped, their stories lost except in scattered court records. Historians still argue about the prevalence of outright coercion versus voluntary participation under limited choices. Clergy and moralists condemned these red light districts with thunderous rhetoric. Pamphlets and sermons likened stews to gates of hell, urging believers to shun sin and practice vigilance. Yet city councils recognized both the economic benefits and the impracticality of outright bans. A pragmatic truce emerged: tolerate but regulate, punish violent or underage participants, and collect steady fees to fund civic projects. The result was an uneasy coexistence, where moral preaching and municipal pragmatism coalesced in dimly lit hallways. For clients, brothels offered more than sex. They provided social space where men swapped gossip, inspected the latest fashions, and debated everything from politics to pilgrimage. Wooden benches in common rooms bore carved inscriptions, initials entwined with hearts, testimonies of fleeting affections inscribed in soft pine. In these communal areas, the scent of spiced ale mingled with sandalwood from imported incense, crafting an atmosphere part tavern, part temple of vice. Outside the stuccoed walls, public perception remained ambivalent. Prostitutes carried a dual identity, sinful outcasts deserving scorn and necessary fixtures, maintaining social order by diverting male lust away from respectable women. Civic statutes often required workers to wear distinctive badges or coloured scarves so respectable ladies could recognise and avoid them, an early form of social distancing. Yet the same statutes that shamed these women also ensured their visibility and safety against worse abuses. In the end, medieval underground pleasures thrived on negotiation. Between regulation and rebellion, consent and coercion, shame and survival. Brothels served as both safety valves for societal pressures and mirrors reflecting desires too potent to suppress. Historians still debate whether this institutionalized sex trade stabilized communities or exacerbated exploitation. What remains undeniable is that the commerce of desire pulsed beneath the surface of medieval life, shaping conversations, policies, and personal histories in ways that resonate to this day. Modern portrayals of medieval sexuality often hinge on exaggerated stereotypes, damsels in distress and brooding nights amid candlelit bedchambers. In blockbuster films and streaming series, corseted costumes and languid embraces dominate the screen, while the messy realities of pre-modern intimacy vanish beneath layers of glossy set design. A mainstream fact is that popular media frequently depict medieval nobles as endlessly licentious, despite evidence that marital fidelity could be quite strict among ruling houses, where dynastic concerns outweighed personal pleasure. These romanticized narratives cater to modern appetites for sensual spectacle, yet they risk flattening the complex interplay of social norms, religious strictures, and economic pressures that shaped sexual behavior. The resurgence of interest in courtly romance, fueled by best-selling novels and viral podcasts, draws heavily on troubadour imagery. Readers encounter verses of unattainable love and forbidden longing, often assuming that medieval romance mirrored contemporary notions of passionate devotion. In truth, love as an autonomous emotional driver emerged slowly. Until the Renaissance, marriage primarily served as a political or economic alliance. Historians still debate whether the notion of romantic love genuinely took hold among commoners or remained an elite pastime practiced by a literate minority. This debate underscores how modern consumers project present-day values onto a distant past. Meanwhile, fringe tidbits from medical treatises of the period occasionally surface on social media. One recipe for aphrodisiac balm calls for the crushed roots of mandrake mixed with animal fat and honey. Users today apply fanciful reenactments, stirring pastel concoctions in kitchen bowls, and sharing TikTok tutorials on their supposed libido-boosting powers. Yet scholars still argue whether such remedies ever reached widespread use, or if they were more the product of medical theorists' imagination than lived experience. The murky line between documented practice and theoretical prescription invites skepticism. Public fascination with medieval brothels inspired a wave of themed tourist attractions. In historic districts of European cities, replica stews offer guided tours that blend theatrical performances with tastings of spiced wines. These attractions emphasize sanitized versions of the past. Actors in period dress deliver tidbits about municipal regulations and licensure, but omit harsher truths about exploitation and coercion. Visitors leave with Instagram-ready snapshots of candlelit alcoves, unaware that authentic records describe inspections for venereal disease and punitive measures against underage or unwilling participants. The legacy of churchly morality also endures. Debates over sexual ethics, contraception, and gender roles echo medieval controversies in modern legislative halls and pulpits. The 1215 Lateran Council's ban on unnatural unions finds resonance in contemporary discussions about reproductive rights. Activists and scholars draw parallels between medieval penance rituals and modern therapeutic practices, noting how both seek to align individual conduct with communal values. Historians still argue whether analogies between medieval morality and today's debates illuminate continuities or impose anachronistic frameworks onto disparate contexts. In literature and gaming, the trope of the medieval temptress persists. From fantasy novels to role-playing video games, female characters often wield sexuality as a weapon or bargaining chip. These portrayals echo images of licensed sex workers and noble seductresses, yet they rarely acknowledge the systemic constraints women faced. Feminist critics challenge these representations, arguing that they reinforce patriarchal fantasies rather than exploring historical agency. The tension between empowerment and objectification mirrors long-running scholarly disputes about women's autonomy in medieval society. Academic conferences on medieval studies now feature panels on sex and the city, examining urban sexual economies and legal frameworks. Papers explore how guild regulations intersected with brothel licensing, or how sumptuary laws governed clothing that signaled marital status. A quirky tidbit: in some German towns, prostitutes wore fool's caps on Sundays to distinguish themselves from married women. Such regulations reveal a surprisingly nuanced approach to public visibility and stigma, an approach that contemporary urban planners overlook when zoning adult-themed businesses. Scholars still debate whether these measures prioritized public order or functioned as moral theater for civic pride. On streaming platforms, documentary series seek to correct sensational myths. Experts walk through reconstructed medieval streets, demonstrating how narrow alleyways influenced privacy or how rudimentary plumbing shaped hygiene. These programs balance scholarly rigor with engaging visuals, yet they must cater to viewership metrics, often selecting the most titillating details. The result is a hybrid genre that both educates and entertains, blurring the line between academic inquiry and infotainment. Viewers, in turn, develop a fragmented understanding, one that mixes accurate insights with residual fantasy. Despite these distortions, genuine interest in pre-modern sexuality has increased public access to digitized archives. Online repositories host translated court records detailing adultery trials or municipal brothel licenses. Amateur historians piece together local case studies, reconstructing lived experiences beyond royal courts. This grassroots scholarship invites fresh perspectives, but also raises concerns about misinterpretation. Historians still argue how best to balance open access research with the need for critical, peer-reviewed analysis. Ultimately, the medieval past remains a mirror reflecting our own anxieties and desires. Whether through glossy entertainment or academic reinvestigation, the era's sexual customs continue to captivate, reminding us that every age reinvents what romance means. As modern audiences scroll through curated depictions of medieval love, they echo centuries-old debates about pleasure, propriety, and power. And while the past never returns, its myths persist, inviting each generation to redefine and perhaps reclaim the stories we tell about intimacy and the human heart. You awaken before dawn, the cold sand pressing into your ribs, and the distant crash of surf filling your ears like a restless beast. Salted mist clings to your cloak, dampening the once bright embroidery that marks you as William's retainer. Torches bob along the shoreline, their flickering glow revealing long lines of horses, oxen, and armoured men kneeling beside sharpened swords. You taste grit on your tongue as oarsmen hammer oak stakes into the beach, forging makeshift docks for the Norman fleet. The world feels heavy, every breath a reminder that this morning you cross from Normandy to conquer a kingdom. A mainstream fact: William assembled roughly 700 ships to carry his invasion force across the Channel, making it one of the largest naval operations of the 11th century. Each vessel creaks under the weight of supplies: barrels of salted pork, sacks of wheat, and stacks of timber bound for hastily erected siege engines. The air is thick with the scent of pine tar and sweat, mingling with the faint tang of fear that drifts from every man clutching a helmet. Your task is simple yet daunting. Help lash planks and pitch tar along the hulls while Norman seamen row against the ebbing tide. The wind wails through rigging, tugging at sails that still rest furled, waiting for the signal. You grip a coil of rope, and feel its rough weave bite into your palms. A quirky tidbit whispers through camp. Some sailors carried charms made from carved whalebone, believing it would guard them against drowning, though historians still debate whether these tokens truly offered comfort or served as unofficial status symbols among the crew. Behind you, camp followers, women and children, huddle near smoky fire pits. Their faces are pale silhouettes in the torchlight, eyes wide as they watch knights don chainmail and mount horses too restless to stand still. A young squire stifles a cough, the sound echoing off limestone cliffs. He's been up most nights, haunted by rumours of Harold's fortress waiting for them across the water. You feel the weight of his hope pressing against your own chest. Survive the crossing, win the battle, claim the crown. Faintly, a herald's horn blasts through the gloom, its note jagged like a thunderclap. William's standard, an imposing banner, crowned with 6 golden lions, wavers atop a silver mast. You straighten, your heart pounding in time with the horn's echo. Around you, men tighten straps across greaves and adjust padded gambesons. Leather creaks, metal rattles, and every sound blends into the soundtrack of invasion. As you haul a coil of rope toward the prow of your assigned galley, you glimpse a scholar's tent pitched near the shoreline. In it, clerics pore over star charts and tide tables, advising on the optimal hour for departure. Historians still argue whether William's use of clerical navigators marked a turning point in medieval military logistics, or was simply an ad hoc solution born of necessity. You lean on the mast, watching the horizon bleed from black to indigo, wondering how much control a man truly holds when he places his faith in charts and prayers. A sudden gust of wind snaps a sail loose, sending it flapping against the mast like a wounded bird. You sprint forward to wrestle it into place, your boots slipping on wet planks slick with seaweed. The cold bites through your woolen hose, and for a moment you imagine your fingers freezing solid, but then you remember the stakes. Failure here means capsizing in open water, a fate worse than dying by sword. You tug until the sail settles, breathing hard as the wind calms and the morning light inches closer. Beside you, oarsmen grunt in unison, their muscles straining against currents. Each stroke sends ripples across the grey sea, marking time until the full fleet moves. You count the ships. 1, 2, 3, rows upon rows, forming a floating forest ready to march upon English soil. The enormity of the endeavour settles in your gut, a leaden weight sharper than any arrow. Yet pride surges through your veins. You are part of this moment, a turning point in history that will echo through the ages. In the murmur of preparation, you hear whispered prayers. Some ask for light winds, others for favour in battle. A friar sprinkles holy water onto prow and stern, invoking saints to guard against drowning and enemy arrows alike. You offer a silent plea of your own, though your faith wavers like a torch flame in the sea breeze. It's said that only those blessed by William's banner will survive Hastings, but legends seldom account for random chance. A merchant's daughter stands nearby, clutching a satchel of herbs meant to soothe seasickness. She sells her wares to soldiers too proud to admit they fear the sea more than the sword. You consider buying a small bundle, lavender, and rosemary tied with sinew, but the price seems exorbitant until you taste a mouthful of damp salt air and regret not packing your own remedy. As the first pale light of dawn crests the horizon, William's voice rings out from the flagship. It's a low, commanding sound that hushes the restless crowd. You straighten your back, chest swelling with determination and dread in equal measure. Today, you will cross the narrow sea, confront a new enemy, and risk everything for a Norman king's ambition. And when you do, the world will remember your steps on that beach as the prelude to an empire. You glance at the tethered horses, their breath steaming in the chill air. They stamp hooves, impatient for the charge. Nearby, a knight hefts his helm, its shape reminiscent of a bird's beak, an innovation the Normans adopted from earlier Mediterranean designs, though scholars still argue how it influenced cavalry tactics at Hastings. You settle your own helm, its leather liner damp with sweat and sea mist, and grip your spear as the signal trumpet sounds again. The fleet shifts, sails unfurl, oars dip in unison. A final cheer rises, ragged but resolute, cutting through dawn's hush. You plant your foot on the gangplank, heart thundering as you climb aboard. The wood quivers under your weight, then steadies. All around, Norman banners catch the breeze. In the coming hours, you will face wind, wave, and warrior. Yet for now, you stand poised between what was familiar Normandy and the unknown shores of England, ready to carve your fate into history. Before the first oars splash into the channel, you shift from handling ropes to hefting heavy barrels ashore, salted pork, dried peas, and clinking amphorae of watered wine. Each barrel bears the insignia of your Lord Steward, its painted caskhead promising both nourishment and the musk of fermented grapes. The morning air quivers with activity as dockworkers, camp followers, and armoured squires swarm the narrow gangways, their boots echoing against wooden planks slick with sea spray. You feel the strain in your back as you heave another barrel, its iron hoops gouging into your palms, reminding you that logistics can be as brutal as battle. A mainstream fact. To maintain supply lines for thousands of men and horses, William's quartermasters organised convoys of pack animals and wagons that stretched for leagues behind the shore. Horses brayed as they strained against leather reins, eager to reach the laden vessels. You guide your horse alongside a row of ships, staggering under the weight of fodder sacks, its flanks damp with sweat from the climb up the muddy incline. Nearby, a team of oxen groans beneath carts heaped with wooden beams destined for siege towers and battering rams. Among the hustle, you trade a word with a veteran archer unloading quivers of yew wood bows, those same bows that will later rain death upon Harold's shield wall. He leans on his bowstave and nods as you pass, a silent acknowledgement that each arrow destined for England begins its life in this chaotic staging ground. A quirky tidbit murmurs through the decks. Some archers oiled their bowstrings with tallow from sheep fat, believing it made arrows fly truer, though historians still debate whether such lubrication notably improved accuracy or merely masked the string's wear. The deck of your assigned ship sways beneath you as you climb aboard to secure cargo in the hold. Below deck, the scent of hardtack mingles with the dank odour of bilge water. Rats skitter in the corners, and you stifle a grimace at their boldness. Above, sailors lash down oak barrels with thick hemp ropes, knotting loops in practised hands. A sudden shout, "Steady!" ripples through the crew as a rope slips loose, sending a barrel rolling toward the edge. You dive forward, planting your chest against the barrel's iron rim until another sailor comes to help secure it. Your heart pounds as the wood creaks under pressure, a reminder that carelessness here can send supplies and men overboard. On deck, the ship's carpenter taps away at a splintered rail, his mallet ringing like distant thunder. He replaces broken planks with hastily cut timber, knots still visible in the grain. Historians still argue whether the speed of the Norman shipbuilders compromised seaworthiness, or whether their craftsmanship held firm despite the rush. You peer over the rail and imagine these wooden hulls cleaving through stormy waters, each seam a potential leak, each nail a testament to Norman resolve. As the sun climbs, you join others in hoisting fresh sails. The heavy canvas snaps open, revealing its coarse weave. Muscles straining, you work in concert with sailors who bark orders in clipped Norman French. Sweat drips down your neck, mixing with the salt that clings to your skin. Nearby, a banner painted on a leather pennon flutters crimson and gold, signifying the captain's allegiance. You salute it reflexively, feeling the surge of unity and trepidation that binds every man on board. Between tasks, you glimpse camp followers distributing bowls of pottage, thick soup of lentils and leeks, by the hundreds. Women ladle the stew into wooden trenchers, passing the bowls along a human chain until each soldier tastes its lukewarm comfort. A squire wipes the rim of his trencher with a cloth before bringing it to his lips, careful not to waste a drop. Each spoonful lodges with a gritty texture, the flavour sparing but sustaining. You swallow deeply, letting the warmth seep into your chest before lacing up leather gloves to handle more rope. In the hold's gloom, you overhear older soldiers recalling tales of past campaigns, Norman raids on Breton coasts and skirmishes in Sicily. They speak of whirlwinds of projectiles, of horses sliding on slick tiles, and of comrades lost to shipwreck. Your grip tightens on the rope as their voices echo against the timbers, and you wonder if you'll earn your own tales or become one of the forgotten who drowned beneath the tides. Midday brings inspection. A steward in fine doublet strides along the docks, clipboard in hand. He records cargo numbers, ticking off barrels and bundles with a feathered quill. You stand at attention as he passes, trying to look more confident than you feel. A miscount could delay departure or strand raiding parties when they reach England. When he's gone, you exhale and roll your shoulders, brushing flaxen hair from your eyes. The steward's presence underscores the high stakes of every barrel loaded and every rope tied. Outside the ships, the harbour bristles with activity. Horses laden with armour trudge toward gangways, nostrils flaring as they step onto planks. Each horse must be calmed. A startled beast can break the gangplank and plunge into the sea. You help steady a stallion loaded with chainmail hauberks, whispering soft words as you stroke its mane. The animal's warmth radiates through your gauntleted hands, a brief comfort in this mechanical rhythm of war. A young page runs by, trailing behind a procession of banners. He staggers under the weight of a small chest, precious documents containing oaths of fealty and lists of provisions. The chest knocks against his hip, threatening to slip, but he straightens and bolts forward, determination set in his jaw. You recall your own youthful eagerness, trading the safety of home for the promises of glory. The boy's journey may end in triumph or tragedy, but for now he embodies the hope riding this fleet into unknown waters. As evening descends, lanterns light up the quayside, casting long shadows that dance across timbered hulls. You secure the final barrel of wine and step back, surveying the assembled fleet. Hundreds of ships, each crowded with men, beasts and equipment, all bound for conquest. The air hums with expectancy and dread. You realize that mere presence on this floating armada binds you to destiny's current, sweeping you toward moments yet unwritten. With the final lash tied, you climb down from the ship and wrap a cloak around your shoulders. Night drapes heavy upon the encampment as you trudge back to your tent, the muffled clang of armour echoing behind you. Tomorrow, the fleet will set sail under William's command, and every soul here will test the mettle of Norman ambition against the breadth of the sea. You lie down on a straw mattress, exhaustion lulling you, yet sleep edges at the boundary of consciousness. And even there your mind races with images of churning waves and English shores. Still, for now, the gathering is complete, and you rest, knowing that dawn will bring both hope and upheaval. You wake to the slap of waves against the hull, the sky a roiling canvas of charcoal clouds and flashes of distant light that illuminate the crests of towering swells. Rain lashes your face in cold sheets, soaking the coarse wool of your tunic and turning the narrow deck into a slick maze of treacherous planks. Every gust of wind moans through the rigging like a wounded beast, and you cling to a cleat with numb fingers, teeth chattering every time lightning rends the darkness. Around you, oarsmen strain at their benches, faces etched with fatigue and terror, while sails thrash above in untamed fury. A mainstream fact. The Norman fleet encountered a fierce Channel storm in late September of 1066, forcing many ships to seek shelter along the English coast or risk capsizing in open water. Waves reportedly reached heights that breached deck level, swamping vessels unprepared for such ferocity. You feel the enormity of those 17th century seas beneath you, a reminder that nature could overturn even the mightiest of ambitions. As you stagger aft, water sloshes over the rail, drenching a pile of spare bows and arrows. A quirky tidbit whispers among the crew. Some sailors claimed they heard the deep rumble of whale song beneath the thunder, believing the creatures mourned the intrusion of human war into their domain. Historians still argue whether such tales arose from genuine marine echoes, or were simply seafaring superstition, born of fear and boredom. Lightning cracks overhead, momentarily revealing the whitecaps roiling around you. The ship pitches violently, and you brace yourself against a barrel of salted meat, feeling it shift beneath your weight until it locks against the mast. Below deck, the groan of timbers protesting the onslaught forms a chorus with the sailors' shouts and the slap of water pouring through poorly caulked seams. Each plank seems poised to give way, and you imagine the spectre of the entire hull dissolving into the abyss. You taste salt spray on your lips and realize you've swallowed more water than any man should. Your cloak, once a dark shade of blue, clings to you like a second skin, its hem frayed and heavy. The wind tears at loose straps, and you yank at them, sending a rip echoing through the gale. Nearby, a merchant's daughter, one of the camp followers pressed into service, hurtles past with a bucket, scooping water over the side to ease the weight. Her shriek as the deck tilts nearly turns into a scream, but she clamps her jaw and races on, chest rising and falling in rapid, frightened gasps. In this chaos, you catch sight of the helmsman, clinging to the wheel with one hand, while the other steadies a lantern. The flicker of its flame dances wildly, casting grotesque shadows across his lined face. Legend says that Norman helmsmen memorized coastal landmarks by heart, but in these black-watered waves, no cliff or beacon remains visible. Historians still argue whether William's navigators relied more on divine invocation or empirical seamanship when steering through storms this severe. Your arms burn from gripping the lines that secure the mainsail. Each time the wind roars, you haul with every ounce of strength, praying the rope doesn't snap. On deck, the captain barks orders in clipped French, his voice nearly swallowed by the tempest. "Hold fast," he shouts, and the crew repeats it in a desperate chorus, lungs burning with cold air and exertion. One mistaken tug could tear the sail loose, leaving you at the mercy of wind and current. Amid the din, a cry rises from the forecastle. A ship has sheared too close alongside and crashed into your starboard hull. Thundering impact knocks you off your feet. You scramble as water pours between the two vessels. Men shout oaths in Latin, French, and broken English, scrambling to keep from being crushed. Splintered wood floats in the wake, a grim reminder that any collision here could become your tomb. Suddenly, a mighty wave looms off the port side, black and bristling with foam. You duck instinctively, feeling the wall of water pass overhead with the force of a battering ram. When it recedes, it leaves your chest heaving and your vision swimming. The deck slopes sharply, and you slide toward the stern, skidding against wet planks until a sailor's strong grip pulls you back upright. You nod wordlessly, offering a grim half-smile before turning to secure another line. Beneath your boots, the deck creaks and moans. Below, crates of wine threaten to burst their seals under pressure. You wonder how many barrels have already ruptured, their precious cargo lost to the waves. In calmer moments, you might have savoured the idea of quaffing Norman vintage in victory, but hope feels distant now, overshadowed by the instinct to simply stay upright. As twilight approaches, if it can still be called that, you notice the lanterns have dwindled to a few guttering flames. The storm dulls your sense of time, each minute stretching into an eternity of cold and noise. A fellow soldier staggers by, clutching his helm as if it were a talisman. He wears the crest of his house, the leaping stallion, painted on his shield, now scuffed and waterlogged. You offer him a nod of solidarity, a silent pact that you'll face this hell together. In the chaos, small rituals emerge. One sailor, soaked through to his breeches, unclasps a leather pouch and lets a handful of earth fall into his palm. He kisses it and rubs the grains between his fingers before tucking the pouch back against his chest. Some swore these pouches contained soil from Normandy's holy shrines, protection against drowning. Historians still debate whether these charms ever prevented harm or simply provided a fleeting calm in a sea of panic. Lightning flashes once more, and you glimpse a churning mass of ships ahead, each pitching and yawing in disarray. The invasion armada looks less like a formidable force and more like a writhing sea of broken timbers and battered sails. You hear the captain's gravelly voice cut through the storm. "Make for the lee of that headland if you can." But the wind screams in defiance, as if mocking any plan born of human will. You reel in the last of your strength to haul the sheet tight, hands numb and raw. The rope burns your flesh, but you don't dare slacken your grip. Behind you, water cascades off the gunwale in torrents. The horizon, once a jagged line, now blends into a wall of grey rain. You wonder how long you can endure this onslaught before the storm breaks both ship and spirit. Yet in the heart of fear, a stubborn ember of defiance glows within you. You recall the oath you swore, to William, to your comrades, and to the promise of conquest. If these waves drown you, your name may vanish. But if you survive, You'll carry this trial as a badge of honor. You draw a ragged breath and bark back to a nearby sailor. Hold the line. His eyes lock on yours for a moment, terrified, determined, before he redoubles his effort. The storm has no mercy, no code, no allegiance. It cares nothing for banners or kings. But as you heave the line one last time, muscles trembling, you sense a shift, a slight slackening of the gale, a momentary lull in the chaos. Whether it's a trick of the gods or simply the storm's passing whim, you embrace it, and together the crew steels itself for whatever comes next: land, battle, or the sea's final claim. You rise before dawn, muscles aching from days of storm and strain, and stagger onto the dew-steeped grass at Senlac Hill. The air is crisp, smelling of crushed herbs and wet earth, mixed with the metallic tang of sharpened steel. Around you, ranks of Norman foot soldiers form into tight wedges, shield walls gleaming with dawn's pale light. You feel the weight of your helm press onto your forehead, the leather straps cutting into damp skin, and wonder if you could swallow your own fear as easily as the stale biscuit lodged in your stomach. A mainstream fact: Harold Godwinson's English forces took position on Senlac Ridge, giving them the higher ground and a defensive advantage that proved critical during the battle. Their shield wall, comprised of huscarls and ferd, formed an almost impenetrable barrier against cavalry and infantry charges. Your orders are clear. Charge the slope once the signal horn sounds, break the shield wall, and carve a path to the enemy's heart. Yet from your vantage, the English line appears more wall than army. A solid mass of round shields, overlapping like dragon scales under the morning sun. You swallow hard, the bile rising in your throat, and grip your spear until your knuckles pale. A fringe tidbit whispers that some Norman knights wore mail mittens infused with goat's hair to insulate against the cold, believing the extra layer improved grip on lance and sword. Whether these mittens offered genuine warmth or merely created a barrier that dulled nerve endings remains. A point scholars still argue whether they improved combat endurance or endangered soldiers through reduced dexterity. The trumpets blare, and a surge of adrenaline floods your veins. You charge forward, boots sinking into the soft turf, the wedge formation pushing as one indomitable force. Around you, comrades yell battle cries in fractured French, each voice rising above the pounding of hooves and the rattle of armor. You lean into your horse, steering it toward the ridge, and the world narrows to the click-clack of hooves and the thud of your heart. As you ascend, English arrows arc toward the sky in deadly rain. Fletched shafts hiss past, thudding into shields and flesh with sickening thumps. A comrade beside you grunts as an arrow pierces his thigh. He slumps in his saddle, wide-eyed, before sinking to the ground. You glance back for a heartbeat. Guilt and urgency collide, and then refocus on the ridge crest, where the shield wall awaits. Your lance strikes first, snapping against polished wood shields and pinging with hollow clang. The impact jolts your shoulder, but your horse's momentum carries you to the next line. A huscarl's axe swings low, and you pull up just in time, feeling the breeze from its arc graze your cheek. You kick your horse forward, drawing your sword as you close in. The scent of sweat, blood, and trampled grass fills your nostrils. In the chaos, you glimpse a banner bearing 3 lions, William's standard waving defiantly above the melee. You redirect your charge toward its bearers, hoping to sever the symbol of enemy morale. Your sword glints as you hack at shield straps and leather belts. Under the cacophony of war, the clang of metal on metal becomes a dreadful symphony. At the shield wall's edge, you meet a burly huscarl wielding a 2-handed axe. He plants his foot firmly, head bobbing beneath his iron helm. You strike first, glancing off his axe head. He counters, forcing you backward. Your sword scrapes against his shield, sparks flying. The world slows. Every breath, every heartbeat magnified. And then you lunge, catching him under the arm. His scream is muffled by helmet bars as he collapses, and you vault past, chest heaving. Around you, the tide shifts as Norman formations falter against disciplined English ranks. In one desperate moment, a wave of mounted knights breaks against the shield wall and retreats, feigning flight. You hesitate. Confusion and hope war within you, before reinforcements surge behind, turning the feint into a real breach. Historians still argue whether the English withdrawal skirmishes were intentional stratagems or spontaneous panic. You seize the opening, driving your horse up the slope. The cheers of your comrades echo, though joy feels distant amid the blood and smoke. The Huscarls clutch for spears, but the gap widens, and you press onward, adrenaline and terror fused into focus. Below the ridge, clusters of English yeomen retreat toward the valley, their shields overturned like fallen leaves. A fellow knight falls at your side, his lance shattered. You dismount and dash toward the nearest standard-bearer, your boots sinking into muddy ruts. Sword raised, you hear the crack of bowstrings and the clang of iron rings. Every motion is instinct, every breath stolen. You stab, parry, and drive forward, the line between life and death mere inches of steel. In a lull, you pause, chest heaving, and survey the field. Bodies lie strewn across the grass, Norman and English alike, faces frozen in grimaces of shock and defiance. The morning sun glints off blood-slicked blades. The smell of turf scorched by fire and desperation hangs heavy. You swallow bile, remembering the oath you swore, victory or death. By midday, the English line begins to crumble. King Harold's royal housecarls, said to be the kingdom's finest, stand shoulder to shoulder at the ridge's core. You charge again, meeting them blade to blade, until the sound of clashing steel erupts into a frenzied crescendo. One by one, the housecarls falter, their formation fraying like worn cloth. Then a cry rings out. "The king is down!" A huscarl's shout, thick with disbelief and hope. You push forward, adrenaline igniting every nerve. The shock of Harold's fall ripples through the enemy ranks, turning discipline into disarray. You strike at a fleeing soldier's unguarded side, and he tumbles, moaning. As the battle's fury wanes, you stand atop the ridge, staring out over a field baptized in violence. Norman banners wave amidst the carnage, their golden lions triumphant against a sea of crimson. Your body trembles, exhaustion and relief battling for dominance. You taste dust and iron, your clothes soaked through. In the aftermath, you kneel beside a wounded comrade, pressing a cloth to his bleeding chest. His eyes flicker with pain, but he offers a weak grin. Together, you gaze upon the conquered land spread below, its fate now sealed by swords and strategy. Historians still argue whether Hastings was won by Norman discipline or by English missteps and chance. You rise, hoisting a Norman banner to stake your claim on this new soil, and feel the weight of destiny settle upon your shoulders. The hill grows silent but for distant cries and the rustle of standards. You close your eyes for a moment, breath slowing, heart echoing the tumultuous peace of war's aftermath, and wonder what tomorrow brings in a land reborn under Norman rule. You step through the grand arched doorway of Westminster Hall, the clamour of court pressing against your chest like a smith's hammer. Tapestries depicting Norman victories hang from lofty walls, their woolen threads still smelling of wool and smoke from recent renovations. Beneath glittering chandeliers, lords in heavy silken tunics murmur in Norman French, their jewelled rings clicking against crystal goblets as they sip spicy wine brought from Bordeaux. The air tastes of roasted goose and wilted rosemary, mingling with the faint musk of damp stone and hurried footsteps on polished flagstones. A mainstream fact. On December 25, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, blending Norman ceremony with Anglo-Saxon ritual by placing the crown on his own head rather than having an archbishop's hand guide him. This bold move signalled his authority but left some nobles whispering that his coronation skirted ecclesiastical protocol. As you follow behind a procession of bishops and knights, you feel the weight of your own chainmail beneath your surcoat, its iron links cool against your ribcage. A fringe tidbit circulates among the court. Some courtiers gifted William live peacocks in gilded cages, hoping to curry favour, only to find the birds' callous screams echoing through stone corridors at dawn. Historians still debate whether the bird's presence was intended as a symbol of prestige or simply an extravagant nuisance. You kneel on the flagstone, mindful of the frost that settled overnight, sending a chill through your woolen hose. As the Archbishop intones Latin blessings, you hear the distant hum of wind rattling the window grills. William's voice cuts through the chant, low and resonant, declaring that Norman laws shall guide this realm and mercy temper our justice. The phrase Norman laws carries both promise and threat. New forest laws will soon turn wood gatherers into outlaws, sowing resentment among peasants who once roamed freely. Rising, you share a look with a fellow knight whose helm carries the dent from a Saxon's axe blow. His eyes glitter with triumph, tempered by uncertainty. An uncertainty you share. Around you, barons bow and kiss the king's hand, accepting manors and titles carved from conquered estates. You feel your own reflection in a polished brazen shield, the image fragmented by dents and scratches, mirroring the fractured land you helped subdue. Beyond the ceremony, court life unfolds in corridors lined with servants bearing trays of almond cakes and spiced cider. You taste a crumb, its sweetness tempered by the sharp zing of clove. A servant's dress brushes your arm, its fabric stiff with starch and fine linen, luxuries that only recently appeared in English markets. Yet under the surface of opulence lies rot. Whispers of unpaid Saxon levies and broken bonds swirl in hushed corners. Court advisors debate the distribution of lands seized from defeated earls. You overhear one clerk recite figures. 50 hides here, a dozen villages there, acres of ploughed fields reassigned with the flourish of quill and ink. A scholarly dispute simmers over whether William's redistribution was systematic or a chaotic scramble by ambitious nobles. Some argue this land policy solidified feudal order. Others contend it unleashed decades of unrest and revolt. In the Great Hall's side chamber, you encounter an English reeve, an official tasked with collecting taxes. His brimmed cap dipped low. He invites you to taste his homemade honey mead, brewed from hives that survived the turmoil of conquest. You lift the goblet, its rim chipped, and sip. The drink clings to your palate with floral sweetness and a hint of earth, grounding you in the conquered soil you now claim. Outside, you glimpse construction crews laying foundation stones for a new Motte and Bailey castle. The rhythmic thud of mallets and the rasp of chisels underscore the permanence of Norman rule. A quirky rumour claims some masons slipped old Saxon runes into the mortar as silent protest. An act of defiance scholars still debate, since no inscription has been definitively verified. Whether myth or fact, the story reminds you that beneath these walls, old traditions refuse to vanish entirely. That evening, you join a banquet beneath vaulted ceilings, carved with grotesque faces that leer down at revellers. Tables groan under roasted swan, pheasant, and platters of buttery cheese. You tear a hunk of bread and dab it in a bowl of thick pottage, seasoned with peppercorns imported from the Levant. The spice lingers on your tongue, a luxury once unimaginable to local farmers who subsisted on barley and turnips. Between courses, troubadours from Normandy entertain with bawdy ditties about a knight who mistook a sow for his mistress in the dark, a tale that draws chuckles and raised eyebrows among stolid Anglo-Saxon guests, still unaccustomed to Norman humour. Their laughter feels uneasy, as though stitched into courtly expectation rather than genuine amusement. Amid the flicker of torchlight, you observe a young page retreat to a quiet corner, unrolling parchment to copy new edicts. His quill scratches furiously, transferring the king's will into multiple copies, destined for sheriffs across the realm. The crackle of parchment reminds you of the power words wield. A single decree can banish families, alter inheritance, or impose fines that bleed commons dry. Historians still argue how effectively these edicts reached rural corners, where illiteracy and local custom often blurred royal intent. At the feast's end, William stands and raises his goblet. His toast reverberates, blessing both conquerors and the subdued, an olive branch wrapped in iron. You echo his words, though the cider tastes bitter in your throat. You recall the families uprooted, the villages razed, and the fields scorched to quell resistance. Triumph feels hollow when measured against such costs. Later, in a quieter hall lined with tapestries showing St. George slaying dragons, you find a moment's respite. A court clerk produces a small wooden box containing Saxon silver pennies melted down to mint new coins bearing the Norman lion. The clink of metal echoes like contemplative notes of loss and renewal. You press a coin between your fingers, its chill reminding you that currency, like power, flows from conquest. Night settles over the court as torch flames gutter and servants extinguish candles. You wander into the courtyard, where the moon glows pale against the November sky. Frost sparkles on cobblestones, and the scent of smoke drifts from hearths. Beneath the newly planted yew trees, symbols of eternal life, warriors and clerics alike pause, gazing at the castle's silhouette etched against stars. You rest your hand on the cold stone of a buttress, your breath frosting in the air. The hush of the court at rest feels fragile, a temporary lull before the next challenge, enforcing new forest laws, quelling rebellions, and shaping an England that will never be the same. As you turn back toward the lit windows, you realize that conquest does not end with a crown. It begins with the weight of responsibility and the uncertainty of forging a realm from divided lands. In the early 17th century, Edo was a sprawling marshland threaded with rivulets and tidal creeks, more swamp than city. Seeking to transform this mucky expanse into his seat of power, Tokugawa Ieyasu and his advisors ordered the carving of broad canals to tame the waterlogged terrain. These man-made arteries cut through reed beds, carpeted in emerald moss and dragonflies, reshaping marsh into strategic highways. A mainstream fact: by 1610, Edo boasted over 15 kilometers of primary canals, linking the burgeoning castle town to fishing villages and rice paddies beyond. Project overseers recruited samurai engineers alongside local laborers, wielding hoes and wooden spades under the glare of midday sun. Muddy water sloshed around their ankles, and the air carried the sweet, sour aroma of decaying vegetation disturbed by fresh earthworks. Timbered stakes marked canal boundaries, their tops slick with algae. These early canals served dual purposes: draining stagnant pools to reduce malaria and facilitating the transport of lumber, rice, and goods into Edo's heart. Historians still argue whether flood control or commercial necessity drove the initial routes, since edicts emphasize both defensive and economic imperatives. A quirky fringe tidbit whispers that some work crews believed the marsh held restless kappa spirits, water imps said to drag careless laborers beneath the surface. To ward off these mythical beings, foremen sometimes hung small bells on bamboo poles along trench edges, believing the tinkling would confuse any lurking creature. Scholars still debate whether such charms were widespread beliefs or later romantic inventions by Edo period storytellers. As canals took shape, simple wooden weirs and sluice gates appeared, fashioned from oak beams bound with hemp rope. The sluices hissed with rushing water whenever openings were widened, the sound echoing across reed beds like low thunder. Tidal shifts from Edo Bay forced engineers to account for brackish surges, prompting early experiments in one-way floodgates that allowed silt-laden water out at low tide, but closed against high-wave intrusion. Over time, these rudimentary contraptions evolved into more sophisticated boxgate designs borrowed from Chinese models, though historians still argue whether the initial inspiration came directly from imported texts or Korean sailors visiting during the Waco pirate suppression. By the mid-1620s, the completed canals gleamed black under lantern light, their surfaces reflecting rows of newly built stilt houses along riverbanks. Bamboo rafts drifted lazily, their poles tapped by boatmen calling out destinations in clipped Edo dialects. The rancid scent of disturbed mud mixed oddly with the briny tang of salt water from the bay, creating an olfactory tapestry unique to canal life. Architecture sprouted accordingly. Warehouses known as kura rose atop earthen mounds beside quays, their white plaster walls and tiled roofs contrasting sharply with ragged fishing huts that danced atop stilts in the shallows. These waterways also shaped Edo's defensive posture. In strategic bends, narrow canals acted as moats, preventing enemy troops from advancing on foot. Wooden drawbridges, called hiryubashi, creaked open at a controller's signal, their iron fittings groaning like old joints. Guards patrolled embankments at night, lanterns swinging softly, listening for illicit crossings. A mainstream fact: the Nihonbashi Canal, completed in 1603, formed part of a defensive network around Edo Castle's southern flank, later integrated into the Tokaido road system, linking the capital to Kyoto. Yet not all canal expansions pleased local farmers. Fields once fertilized by natural flooding now lay unnecessarily dry, leading to crop failures and peasant complaints. In response, authorities commissioned smaller feeder channels to return water to rice paddies, adding complexity to an already intricate network. Historians still debate the socio-economic impact of these adjustments. Some view them as enlightened agrarian planning, while others argue they represented top-down impositions that strained village communities. Despite administrative frictions, the canal grid advanced Edo's urban growth. Merchants piled goods aboard flat-bottomed boats, loading barrels of soy sauce, kegs of sake, and bundles of tatami reed. The market buzzed as wooden barges scraped against stone quays, punctuated by the clatter of rolling rice sacks. Town criers hawked nightly boat tours for pleasure seekers, marking an early form of urban leisure. In humid summer evenings, the canal surface shimmered under paper lanterns, reflecting delicate shadows of willow branches and the occasional koi that surfaced in calmer bends. A cultural fringe story claims that famed haiku poet Matsuo Basho once penned verses beneath a willow-shaded canal bank, inspired by the gentle slap of oar against water. While no original manuscript survives, replicas in later anthologies evoke the ambience of Edo's waterways. Emerald ripples sigh, lantern glow drifts downstream, night's breath stirs the reeds. Scholars still argue whether Basho's actual travels included nocturnal canal-side reveries, or if these verses emerged from collective nostalgia in the Bakumatsu era. By the end of the 17th century, Edo's canal system stretched over 40 kilometers, crisscrossing the city in a grid that resembled a spider's web. Maps from the period, drawn in meticulous detail, depict canals branching like tree limbs from the main trunk route, later known as the Nihonbashi line, feeding smaller veins into every ward. These maps bear annotations in Edo's characteristic cursive script, noting water depths, toll stations, and even rumoured haunted corners where midnight poltergeists supposedly overturned passing boats. Historians still debate the accuracy of these annotations versus cartographic embellishment meant to entertain wealthy map collectors. The interplay between natural hydrology and engineered canals created a dynamic urban ecosystem. Turtles and carp thrived alongside riverbanks, while herons and kingfishers perched on exposed groins, scanning for fish. Canal-side tea houses installed stepped platforms for patrons to dangle feet in the cool water, offering respite from the summer heat, an early urban version of beach clubs. Merchants capitalized on this, selling chilled mulberry wine and watermelon slices from baskets balanced on raft decks. Through it all, the origins of Edo's waterways reveal a city rising from marsh through strategic planning, communal labour, and engineering ingenuity. The canals stand as silent witnesses to political ambition, economic transformation, and cultural flowering. Historians still argue whether the true genius lay in the grand scale of construction or in the adaptive modifications that followed initial failures. Yet what remains undeniable is that these waterways sculpted the identity of Edo, forging connections between people and place that would endure long after the shogunate's rule ended. Along the banks of the Sumida River, master carpenters and labourers converged with an almost obsessive devotion to craft canal embankments and sluice systems capable of withstanding both seasonal floods and the tsunami of commerce. They drove towering wooden piles of cypress and oak into marshy soil, a technique borrowed from Buddhist temple foundations, creating sturdy posts that rose from the mud like silent sentinels. A mainstream fact. Edo's engineers employed pile foundations sealed with crushed seashell mortar, a mixture known to harden underwater, to prevent embankment collapse under hydraulic pressure. To build these embankments, work crews formed in disciplined lines, handing up bundles of rice straw mats soaked in clay-rich river silt. As each mat layer settled, overseers pressed mud into gaps with wooden mallets, the rhythmic thud echoing through the misty dawn like distant drumbeats calling workers to battle. Beneath the surface, compacted mats acted as geotextiles, distributing water pressure and filtering sediment. Historians still argue whether these methods originated in China's Grand Canal projects, or evolved independently under Japan's unique ecological demands. In other stretches, engineers experimented with stone revetments. Local quarries supplied folded layers of slate and schist. Rocks split into thin, interlocking slabs, arranged like fish scales along canal edges. When torrential rains sent muddy torrents surging, these revetments absorbed the force, diverting water into overflow channels. A fringe tidbit suggests that some stonemasons inscribed tiny symbols on select slabs as secret signatures of their work, visible only to those who knew where to look. Scholars still debate whether these artisans actually left personal marks, or if later guidebooks invented the idea to add mystique to Edo's canal tours. Central to flood management were the large wooden sluice gates known as funatsubogata. Situated at canal mouths, these box-like structures featured curving timbers and counterweights that balanced immense water pressure. Operators trained in specialized guilds manipulated long wooden levers to raise or lower planks, controlling flow rates with surprising precision. When gates slammed shut against surging tides, the sound reverberated like thunder off nearby warehouses. Historians still argue whether the original design derived from Korean tidal gates seized during the Imjin War or developed as a novel response to Tokyo Bay's unique currents. Maintaining these gates demanded continuous vigilance. Flood records note that during the monsoon season of 1657, one poorly maintained sluice collapsed under a deluge, sending a wall of brackish water inland and inundating rice paddies for miles. In response, the shogunate established the Kawatorigumi, a permanent river watch guild, tasked with inspecting canals, dredging silt, and repairing embankments before minor breaches could become catastrophes. Guild members wore distinctive blue jackets and tall straw hats, their presence as reassuring as the tolling of temple bells during disaster drills. The sheer manpower involved in canal engineering created an economy unto itself. Bamboo scaffolding sprouted along every embankment, enabling stonemasons to maneuver heavy slabs without cranes. Work gangs specialized in distinct tasks: pile driving, mat layering, stonework, and carpentry, each overseen by a foreman who kept meticulous records in ledger books. These ledgers, penned in flowing cursive script, listed daily labor quotas, material costs, and even weather conditions. Historians still argue whether the efficiency of this system inspired later Tokugawa reforms in urban management, or was simply the product of ad hoc scaling to meet growing demand. Guild hierarchies introduced their own dramas. Senior carpenters wielded authority that rivaled minor samurai, granting them influence over local politics and trade. Stories survive of apprentices who abandoned training mid-project, fleeing the relentless discipline of masons feared for both skill and severity. A fringe anecdote recounts an enterprising young worker who rigged his own set of bamboo stilts to traverse flooded sections, performing acrobatic feats that earned him both admiration and punishment for endangering others. Scholars still debate whether such tales are exaggerations meant to warn novices or genuine accounts of individual ingenuity. Beyond embankments, canal engineers tackled the challenge of merging freshwater and tidal channels. The confluence of the Kanda and Nihonbashi waterways required innovative lock-like structures to prevent saltwater intrusion into Edo's drinking supply. Engineers built angled barriers with graduated openings, allowing fresh river water to flow upstream while deflecting incoming tides. This delicate balance ensured that wells near the canals remained potable and that rice paddies repurposed by samurai retainers did not wither under saline assault. Historians still argue whether these barriers functioned more as symbolic displays of shogunal control over nature or as indispensable infrastructure preserving public health. The selection of materials revealed a keen understanding of local ecology. Cypress, valued for its rot resistance, formed the backbone of gate structures, while heartwood from old-growth pines fortified sluice frames. Artisans harvested bamboo from mountain slopes to craft cofferdams for wet excavation, driving bundles of poles into earth to create temporary dry work zones. Little attention in official records remains for the environmental impact of such extractions, but a fringe consideration notes that some villages petitioned to restrict bamboo harvesting after noticing hillside erosion. Scholars still debate whether these early conservation efforts represent genuine ecological awareness or localized self-interest. As the canal network expanded, so did the scale of innovation. In low-lying districts, engineers installed double sluice systems, nested gates that minimized water loss during tidal fluctuations. These complex contraptions required precise carpentry, two sets of interlocking planks fitted into reinforced grooves, sealed each with hemp gaskets treated in camphor oil to repel rot. Operating them became an art, with operators reciting rhythmic chants as they pulled levers in timed sequence. Historians still argue whether these chants held practical value as synchronization tools or functioned as ritual echoes of Shinto purification rites. The culmination of these engineering feats materialized in the canal's enduring resilience. Though floods remained a constant threat, Edo seldom experienced catastrophic inundations after the mid-1700s. When heavy rains swelled the Arakawa River in 1755, canal gates held firm, rerouting excess water into auxiliary basins that farmers used to irrigate rice paddies during dry spells. This dual function as flood control and agricultural irrigation cemented the canal's role as lifelines for both city and countryside. A mainstream fact, records from the shogunate's Edo flood archives indicate a 70% reduction in severe canal breaches following the installation of double sluice systems. By the time Western envoys arrived in the mid-19th century, Edo's canal infrastructure impressed visitors accustomed to European locks and levees. They noted the ingenious use of local timber and the cohesive management of water resources by guilds under shogunal oversight. Yet these envoys also observed that the canal's age had begun to show. Some embankments leaned perilously, and many timber piles required replacement. Historians still debate whether oil-based wood preservatives introduced in the late Edo period prolonged canal life or masked structural decay, until Meiji-era modernization rendered traditional methods obsolete. Today, beneath the asphalt and modern embankments of Tokyo, traces of these original canals persist. Ancient stone lids hidden under street grates, irregular property lines following old waterways, and place names like Nihonbashi and Kanda echoing their liquid origins. The engineering marvels of Edo's canal era endure not only in physical remnants, but in collective memory, reminding urban planners that water can be harnessed and honored in equal measure. Boats drift silently beneath the arching timber bridges of Edo's canals, their lacquered hulls skimming reflections of lantern light across obsidian water. Merchants lean over gunwales to unload barrels of soy sauce, each seal cracked with a faint hiss that mingles with the soft plink of ceramic jars settling onto keystones. You hear the creak of oarlocks as fishermen return with morning's catch. Smoked eel and sweet fish, glistening like polished jade beneath straw baskets. This network of waterways formed the city's circulatory system, pulsing with commerce, communication, and the daily rhythms of life. A mainstream fact, by the mid-18th century, canal traffic in Edo surpassed that of most contemporary European cities, carrying everything from rice and timber to porcelain and charcoal along over 40 kilometers of interconnected routes. Barges, rafts, and small pleasure boats wove through the arteries of the city, moving goods and people with an efficiency unmatched by rutted dirt roads. Historians still argue whether the reliance on waterways impeded the development of overland infrastructure or encouraged a uniquely water-centric culture of urban life. Along the banks, shops known as tonya clustered at canal junctions. Under eaves draped with moss, ivory-handed clerks hammered wooden seals onto shipping manifests, their ink-soaked stamps echoing like gunshots on wooden counters. A quirky tidbit notes that some tonya specialized in fetching floating lost goods, bales or bundles, washed away by a sudden tide, and returning them for a modest fee, though scholars still debate whether this constituted a formal service or informal opportunism among boatmen. These junctions also hosted night markets. Paper lanterns bobbed amidst stalls, selling grilled mochi and candied chestnuts, the sweet steam rising into humid air thick with the scent of incense from nearby shrines. You pass under low-hanging bridges and glimpse cramped living quarters above, tatami-matted rooms with sliding shoji screens that opened onto narrow balconies. Residents scooped water with long-handled ladles to wash clothes, the soft plunk-plunk rhythm blending with distant temple bells. Bamboo poles leaned against walls, drying bundles of hijiki seaweed harvested from Edo Bay. Children's laughter echoed as they dangled feet in cool currents, daring each other to splash passing barges. Everyday tasks and simple pleasures intertwined seamlessly with the water's flow. Transport services thrived. Hatago inns along canal banks offered lodging to travelling courtiers and merchants. Boats tethered to posts at the inn's doorstep, their captains donning straw raincoats and conical hats to guide guests through morning fog. You imagine settling into a tatami room overlooking the canal, the lullaby of passing oars lulling you towards sleep. Innkeepers pumped fresh water from wells, carrying it in buckets to stone basins, where patrons washed before evening meals of miso soup and pickled vegetables. Religious life also embraced the canals. Small shrines sat on islets of earth at waterway intersections, their vermilion gates arched like welcoming hands. Pilgrims arrived by boat to pray for safe passage and bountiful catches, tossing coins into shadowy depths. Festivals transformed the canals into floating parades. Boats festooned with lanterns bore Mikoshi shrines in miniature, accompanied by chanting priests and drumming taiko. The water carried both reverence and revelry, binding spiritual practice to quotidian routine. In the back alleys behind grand warehouses, textile dyers harnessed canal water for vivid fabrics. Indigo vats sat on raised platforms, their inky depths reflecting the sky. Workers dipped swaths of cloth, emerging rich azure hues that would become samurai cloaks and merchant robes. The pungent scent of fermentation melded with canal air, a stark reminder that industry loved proximity to water's cleansing flow, even as it polluted it with organic runoff. Healthcare found its avenues here too. Campo herbalists set up shop along quieter stretches, drawing water to brew medicines of ginger and licorice to treat exhaustion from long voyages. Barrels of spring water, sourced from distant mountain streams, were delivered daily to apothecaries, each bucket carried by apprentice under a yoke that pressed into shoulders. Scholars still argue whether access to clean canal water reduced outbreaks of waterborne diseases, or whether the mixing of waste and runoff undermined these benefits, fostering occasional typhoid scares. Entertainment prospered on water's stage. Pleasure boats called yukai carried small groups to watch cormorant fishing at dusk, fishermen guiding trained birds to snatch ayu salmon in lantern-lit waters. The glint of fish in their bill thrusts, and the echo of rope tightening against boats, exuded a primal thrill that drew aristocrats and commoners alike. These nocturnal spectacles became social calendars' highlights, underscoring how the canals provided both livelihood and leisure. At night, the canals transformed into corridors of soft luminescence. Floating lanterns bobbed like fireflies, guiding boats along dark channels. Whispered conversations drifted upward from below decks. Voices hushed as though the water listened. Noran curtains in riverside tea houses swayed in gentle breezes, and patrons sipped warm sake from small lacquer cups, the drink's heat seeping into chilled palms. The faint taste of salt clung to the air as the city exhaled, lulled by the promise of another day's commerce. Yet not all life along the canals was idyllic. Floodwaters occasionally surged without warning, sweeping away stores and drowning animals loose along the banks. Canal dwellers kept sandbags at doors and learned to lash belongings high in rafters. Children were taught from infancy to recognize rising tides by the sound of gurgling beneath floorboards. Community resilience coalesced in neighborhood fire brigades, teams skilled in boat rescue and dike repair, standing by whenever torrential rains threatened the delicate balance between land and water. Historians still debate how much these grassroots efforts influenced official flood control policies versus reflecting localized necessity born of constant vigilance. Through every ebb and flow, the canals shaped Edo's collective identity. Artisans painted evocative scenes of oarsmen battling dawn mists, while poets celebrated reflections of moonlight in slow eddies. Each ripple carried stories of births and funerals, trade and gossip, devotion and defiance. In this watery tapestry, everyday life found rhythm and meaning. In commerce's pulse, in festivals' glow, and in the persistent promise that water, once tamed, would carry society forward into an era of unprecedented growth. When summer monsoons arrive, Edo's calm canals transform into restless veins, swollen with murky currents, pressing hungrily against embankments carved by centuries of toil. In 1657, torrential rains unleashed the Great Mereki flood, drowning entire neighborhoods and turning streets into rivers where floating debris clacked against eaves like ominous chimes. The mainstream fact is that this disaster claimed over 100 lives and prompted the shogunate to overhaul flood defenses, redirecting rivers and reinforcing embankments across the city's low-lying wards. The storm's onset began with roiling clouds that hung low over Edo Bay, their bellies pregnant with rain. At first, only a few drops pattered against wooden shutters, but soon the sky opened in sheets so dense they blotted out midday light. The scent of wet pine and hot earth rose in the air as clay embankments turned slick, their surfaces seeping muddy water into nearby streets. Lanterns guttered, their flames snuffed by gusts that rattled paper screens and sent shoji doors yawning open like wounded mouths. As floodwaters surged, samurai and commoners alike scrambled to salvage what they could. A quirky fringe tidbit holds that some Edo residents trapped in inundated homes fended off rats by tying bits of salted fish to strings and dangling them above the rising water, luring vermin away from sleeping areas. Though scholars still debate whether this tactic actually reduced infestations or simply entertained the besieged with macabre distractions. In makeshift rescue boats, neighbors ferried one another past half-submerged storefronts, pushing against planks floating loose from docks. Children clung to mothers' kimonos, eyes wide as the world upended around them. In the immediate aftermath, the shogunate dispatched elite flood brigades, engineer samurai, trained in dike repair and river management, to the hardest-hit wards. They wielded iron shovels and pails of gravel, working under torchlight to plug breaches in canal banks with bundles of straw and woven bamboo screens. The head of the brigade, often a retainer of high rank, issued orders through curt bows and clipped commands, his lacquered armor stained dark with mud. Historians still argue whether these samurai-led efforts represented genuine central coordination or were improvisational responses dictated by local officials facing political pressure. Emergency measures extended beyond physical repairs. The shogunate mandated the establishment of tenma-dai, relief stations, temporary shelters in temples and shrines where afflicted families could find rice rations and straw mats. Priests chanted sutras to calm terrified survivors, their voices weaving through sanctuaries scented with Palo Santo and burning camphor. Officials registered the displaced, marking names on wooden tags tied to bamboo poles outside the shelters so families could reunite when waters receded. Despite these efforts, many never returned to former homes. Some tenma-dai became permanent enclaves, reshaping Edo's urban map as residents rebuilt along higher ground. In flooded market districts, merchant guilds organized floating bazaars. Boat-mounted stalls offered boiled chestnuts and sweet bean paste dumplings to rescue workers, the steam rising like silent prayers. Tea carts bobbed beside waterlogged rice sacks, and customers sipped hot matcha from lacquer bowls, held precariously in one hand while gripping boat rails with the other. These ad hoc markets sustained both body and morale, even as rumors flew of price gouging on essentials. Rice sold at 2 or 3 times the usual rate, leading to shogunate edicts, capping food costs during emergencies. Damage assessment required navigating a labyrinth of sunken back alleys and submerged bridges. Survey teams in straw raincoats measured water depths with marked poles, their inscriptions noting past flood heights for comparison. Records show that average canal embankments rose only by a few centimeters annually prior to Mereki, but after the flood, authorities raised key dikes by half a meter, adding layers of clay and stone that hardened into formidable bulwarks. Historians still debate whether these structural upgrades truly prevented future catastrophes or merely postponed the inevitable by shifting weak points downstream. Beyond the city's heart, rural tributaries spilled over rice paddies, washing away seedlings and delaying harvests. Peasant delegations marched to Edo Castle, pleading for tax relief and emergency loans to replant fields. Their petitions, inscribed on wooden tablets, often went unanswered or were met with tepid sympathy. In response, village councils instituted communal seed banks. Sacks, stored in raised granaries above floodlines, to ensure sowing supplies endured. Some argue that these grassroots adaptations prefigured modern disaster-resilient practices. Others suggest they arose from sheer necessity in regions neglected by central authority. Technological innovations emerged from the crisis. Engineers refined the canal's sluice gates, installing adjustable iron grates at drainage outlets to trap debris and slow water backflow during storms. They also introduced early warning markers, wooden posts carved with notches representing past flood levels, so citizens could anticipate when water would breach thresholds, requiring evacuation. A fringe engineering diary describes a prototype seesaw gate that tilted under pressure, automatically sealing small leaks, though scholars still dispute whether this design ever progressed beyond experimental drafting. Community solidarity proved essential. Fishermen's guilds lent boats and poles to rescuers, while local sake brewers donated rice lees, byproducts rich in nutrients, to provide sustenance to the hungry. In temple courtyards, carpenters fashioned temporary footbridges from cedar planks to reconnect cut-off neighborhoods. Women's associations organized sewing circles, stitching quilts from salvaged cloth to distribute among those who lost bedding and clothing. These acts of collective compassion became law, commemorated in woodblock prints depicting smiling volunteers amidst ruins, images that both celebrated human resilience and glossed over the depth of tragedy. By the 18th century, a formalized Edo flood code codified many emergency protocols, mandated inspection schedules for embankments, obligatory training for local flood response teams, and a registry of designated high ground refuges. Some daimyo adopted similar regulations in their domains, exporting lessons learned from Edo's harrowing ordeal. Historians still argue whether this codification stemmed from altruistic governance or from peasant unrest that threatened broader social stability if left unaddressed. The rhythm of Edo's seasons regained equilibrium in later decades, yet memories of the Meriki flood endured in ceremony. Annual memorial services at Switengu Shrine commemorated lives lost to water's fury. Priests releasing paper boats set ablaze along canal junctions to honor the departed. Lantern-lit processions drifted through quiet waterways, the flames mirrored in dark ripples as crowds watched in reverent silence. These rituals underscored a duality: respect for water's vital bounty and fear of its unchecked power. As modern Tokyo replaced Edo's wooden sprawl, many canals were filled in or rerouted into underground conduits, but the city's flood legacy persists. Contemporary engineers credit Edo's early emergency measures as the foundation for Tokyo's sophisticated levee systems and automated floodgates. Yet urban planners still debate whether reliance on hardened defenses fosters complacency, risking catastrophe if overwhelmed by unprecedented typhoons. This ongoing discourse echoes the centuries-old tension between human ambition and natural forces that shaped Edo's waterways from their inception. In the heart of modern Tokyo, beneath streams of neon and the hum of bullet trains, the spirit of Edo's canals endures in subtle but profound ways. Contemporary urban planners frequently integrate water features into public spaces, linear parks tracing former canal lines, pedestrian promenades along gently flowing streams, and rain gardens designed to collect stormwater runoff. A mainstream fact is that Tokyo's 1970s water management reforms incorporated over 400 kilometers of underground conduits, many aligned with Edo's original waterways, to control floods and ease pressure on aging sewers. Historians still argue whether this alignment represents a deliberate homage to Tokugawa-era engineering or a practical reuse of pre-existing routes born of convenience. Walking beside the Shibuya River today, you pass under concrete overpasses that conceal its course, yet plaques and artist installations hint at its hidden presence. In quieter districts, open channels lined with stone revetments echo the form and texture of 17th century embankments, their surfaces mottled by moss and lichens, thriving in shaded niches. A quirky tidbit notes that during redevelopment in the 1990s, construction crews unearthed Edo-period wooden sluice gates sealed in anaerobic mud, their timber beams remarkably preserved and later exhibited in a local museum. Scholars still debate whether these gates were part of a long-forgotten secondary network or remnants of experimental flood control trials. Tokyo's annual Waterways Festival celebrates this legacy with guided kayak tours along restored canal sections, lectures on hydraulic heritage, and interactive exhibits showcasing traditional carpentry techniques used in sluice construction. Participants dip wooden paddles into calm waters, tracing routes once plied by rice barges and merchant vessels. Beneath the surface, fish species like carp and crucian perch, descendants of those stocked for food and leisure by Edo's residents, dart through submerged recesses. A mainstream fact. DNA analyses confirm that some canal populations carry genetic markers continuous with Edo period stock, suggesting intentional breeding and release by early aquaculturists. Historians still debate whether these introductions served primarily culinary aims or symbolized community stewardship of shared resources. Rainwater harvesting stations now mirror the function of Edo's tidal gates, capturing rooftop runoff in underground cisterns before releasing it gradually into combined sewer systems. These modern rain gardens feature biofiltration media, layers of gravel, sand, and organic compost that echo the geotextile matting of straw and clay employed under Tokugawa embankments. A fringe story claims that local gardeners still bury small clay charms, replicas of kappa bells. Beneath these installations is a playful nod to folklore, although urban ecologists question whether such rituals persist more in tourist brochures than in community practice. In the financial district of Nihonbashi, gleaming glass towers stand atop the very stones laid to reinforce canal banks over 400 years ago. Archaeological surveys conducted during subway expansions revealed intricately mortared oyster shell foundations, long obscured by layers of concrete. Engineers catalogued these findings meticulously, adapting soil stabilization methods to accommodate high-rise loads while preserving fragments of Edo's hydraulic legacy. Historians still argue whether the decision to conserve these structures stemmed from genuine respect for heritage or from budgetary constraints that made retrofitting easier than full-scale excavation. Public art installations pay tribute to the city's watery past. Along reclaimed canal walkways, bronze plaques depict stylized boatmen steering flat-bottomed vessels beneath willow canopies. Interactive water fountains projected against walkway walls simulate the rush of sluice gates opening, their channeled jets choreographed to reflect traditional gate mechanics. In one popular installation, sensors detect pedestrian movement and adjust water flow accordingly, an homage to the manual lever systems once operated by guild-trained gatekeepers. A mainstream fact, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government's 2015 Edo Riverscape initiative sponsored over 30 such installations, blending technology with historical narrative to engage residents and visitors alike. Historians still debate whether these displays foster genuine understanding of hydraulic history or risk commodifying heritage for entertainment. Environmentalists point to the resurgence of riparian bird species, kingfishers, herons, and grey wagtails, along revitalized waterways, as proof that aquatic ecosystems can coexist with urban density. In former floodplain zones, native reeds and sedges have been reintroduced, stabilizing banks and providing habitat for amphibians and insects. Water quality monitoring shows reduced levels of phosphates and heavy metals compared to pre-restoration baselines, yet some ecologists argue that sediment, traps and treatment wetlands should be expanded to meet future climate challenges. Historians still debate whether Edo's original balance of commerce and ecology can fully translate to 21st century megacities. Community-led canal cleanup days harken back to the labor guilds of the Tokugawa era. Volunteers clad in waders haul debris, prune overgrown vegetation, and measure water flow rates for citizen science projects. Local schools integrate canal studies into curricula, teaching children to build miniature sluices and test hydraulic head in scaled models. A quirky detail recalls that one elementary class fashioned kappa figurines to stand guard by their sample channels, a whimsical echo of Edo's cautionary legends. Scholars still question whether such educational programs produce long-term stewardship or remain episodic events detached from systemic urban planning. Flood risk remains a pressing issue. As typhoons intensify, Tokyo's modern levee and conduit systems face unprecedented loads. Engineers reference Edo period records, such as the Meriki flood logs, to model extreme scenarios, adjusting computational fluid dynamics simulations with historical data points. These reconstructions reveal that some 18th century dike elevations would be inadequate against 21st century storm surges, underscoring the need for continual investment. Historians still debate whether reliance on centuries-old precedents constrains innovative design or provides invaluable long-term perspective. Through careful layering of past and present, Tokyo's waterways embody resilience, adaptation, and cultural memory. Where once samurai engineers drove stakes into marshes, contemporary specialists install sensor-laden floodgates and real-time monitoring stations. Where once wooden barges plied canal labyrinths, electric tour boats glide past transparent viewing panels revealing submerged archaeological remains. In this continuum, water remains both challenge and opportunity, a conduit of life, commerce, and connection. As the city pulses around these channels, each eddy and outflow a fingerprint of history, Tokyo reminds us that urban landscapes evolve in conversation with natural forces and human ingenuity. Edo's canals, carved by mud and muscle, have not vanished. They persist in stone, in story, and in the engineered veins that sustain the metropolis today. Historians still argue whether their greatest legacy lies in tangible infrastructure or in the cultural ethos of harmonizing water's energy with urban life. Slow now, and let the rhythms of water whisper through your mind. Imagine the gentle arc of a sluice gate, its wooden panels rising and falling in time with your breath. The city's pulse softens, each footstep replaced by the soft lap of currents against stone. Feel the weight of centuries lift from your shoulders as you drift alongside willow-shaded banks, where lantern light drips across reflections like glowing petals. Recall the hands that carved channels through mud and reeds, and honor each whispered legend of kappa bells and hidden sluice gates preserved in anaerobic earth. Sense the unity of engineers and artisans whose labor shaped a city from swamp, and remember how modern streets trace their silent pathways beneath asphalt and concrete. Let gratitude for their ingenuity ease the tension in your muscles. As the final ripples of Tokyo's waterways settle, allow the soft murmur of flowing water to cradle your thoughts. In this tranquil current, find connection to ancient marshes, to the crackling of reed mats under mallet, to the hush of tidal gates at dusk. Your journey through time draws to a gentle close, carried on currents both old and new. Now, release the final threads of wakefulness. Sink deeper into your reprieve, where history's watercourses fade into restful darkness. May your dreams flow smoothly, guided by the serene echoes of Edo's canals and the promise of tomorrow's dawn. Sweet dreams.